All right, thanks everybody for joining the session. This is the Accelatis Essentials Custom Failure Criteria for Health Checks. We are going to go over the material. It's going to be about 15 minutes long. We're going to focus on this specific subject, and as usual, no Q&A afterwards. If you do have any questions, you can always email me or the support mailbox. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And we're going to get right into it. We don't have a whole bunch to go over, but this specifically has to do with custom failures as it pertains to health checks. So a health check, of course, is something that you would run inside the Accelatis product. And if you think about it on its most basic level, it really is a pass or fail check that you have set up, right? So you can see my screen here from my sandbox, and I've got a whole bunch of things that are going on, right? My health checks, either a green check means that it ran okay and everything's good. Red X means that it failed. A blue question mark might mean something else, unchecked by the agent, or something stopped it from happening, and I've got a few disabled in here. And again, this is generally the way that we would like you to think about health checks. Something as it's either up or it's down. It either came back or it didn't, right? But there's also some added functionality that you can get out of your health checks, and that is the custom failure criteria. So you see on the screen, as you are configuring your health check, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little checkbox there, and when you select it and you hit the ellipses that are next to that screen, you get this response time criteria box that jumps up at you. Now, this is the custom failure criteria. Not all health checks have this, but the ones that do allow you to set a low or a high threshold, much in the same way that you might set on a KPI, where you can get a mild severity, maybe if it reaches some point, or a higher severity if it reaches some critical point. And just like KPIs, it's got the same type of mechanism where you can have your values be below a threshold or above a threshold, or in between. So if you want to make sure that your value is hovering at some point, you don't want it to go below or above, right? So you could set all those things up here, and you could see that for the most part, again, that little screen looks just like it does on KPIs, and that is because we have we've reused this box. Now, there are some things in here, the variable assignments, even though they're there, it's a reused box, so those aren't going to work for you, but you certainly could launch flows and stuff as these things are set off. So the health checks that do have this added custom failure criteria to it are listed here, and really the questions that you're going to want answered are listed with each one. So for instance, you have your database check, which normally just says, hey, is the database up or down? But you can additionally say, well, how long did it take for me to connect to the database, right? And depending on that, if it takes too long, you can get an alert, or you can have some flow launch. So it just goes right down the line here. We have a ping test, same thing, how long did it take to complete? SQL request, how long did it take to execute, right? So all of these things can play in to give you that added dimension of timing when it comes to your health check. So custom script and URL probe are the same exact way, along with user simulation. The one different one is the SQL request scaler, and I'm not sure if you guys use this or if you're familiar with it, but the SQL request scaler, as opposed to the first listed SQL request where you just say select something from my table and let me make sure that that it's there, let me make sure that it took this fast to execute. The SQL request scaler actually returns back the number of rows that are in that database. So when you run a SQL request scaler health check, even though the column says like milliseconds, those are actually the number of rows that got returned with your custom health check, and that's great because you can plot the size of a database, and you could see the growth in it. Well, the custom failure now gives you the ability to take that same SQL request scaler and say, well, if my rows are over this number or under this number or not in between this number, right? How many rows did it return? And if you wanted to, if it got to a certain number, say if it got to a couple 100,000, that you want something to happen, you want to launch a flow or you want to get an alert, you can do that. So SQL request scaler, a little bit different because it works with the number of rows versus the number of milliseconds. So a couple of bullet points to remember about using custom failure criteria. They're meant for a single instance alerting. Okay, in other words, it doesn't matter whether the original health check passed or failed. This works, regardless of that. So if your custom failure criteria is met, it's going to go ahead and it's going to shoot off an alarm, shoot off an alert or launch a flow or whatever. So one at a time, if it happens, it's going to let you know about it. And again, the values for the alert are actually held within the health check. So if you want to graph those things, you can export them as part of the health check or create a graph. So in other words, even though you've got your custom failure criteria to say, hey, I want to send off an alarm if this took longer than 10 seconds to run, if you wanted to graph that out, you would just graph the original health check because we do keep those values. And like I said, you can launch a flow from a custom failure. However, you won't be able to override the values. So on the original health check, if you were to launch an email flow and you wanted to change the subject or the sender, you can do that in the original one. But for this custom failure, you will find that that doesn't work. We've actually enabled that in the 4.1 version, so that will be coming soon. And again, values are entered in seconds, but you'll see the response time is in milliseconds. In other words, when you see your health check screen, it says that the process took maybe 47 milliseconds or whatever. But when you enter those values into your custom failure criteria, it's going to ask for them in seconds. So just keep that in mind. And if you do need to do any calculation, go ahead and do that. And again, like I said, the SQL request scaler looks a little different. You can see on the screen at the bottom, this is an alert that I got sent from a custom failure criteria. And you can see that milliseconds are sort of entered in there, and unfortunately that's the way it looks because it works off that same timing mechanism. But just know that for the SQL request scaler that those are actually rows. So even though it says response time is 41,758 milliseconds, that's how many rows are in my table. And the number of rows was above my thresholds, which I put in for 30,000 as a low one or 50,000 as a high one. So configuring your custom failures, again, there's not much to it, but I'm going to go ahead and show you quickly that I set a few things up here and just walk you through it. So if I log on to the client, I went ahead and I built every single health check out that can have a custom failure on it. And you'll see here I put a little filter at the top. So when I come in, I can simply come down to custom failure. And these are all the ones that I've given back. I want you to just note the difference between the SQL request and the SQL request scaler. Let me make that a little bigger. Right. So even though I could see that they both returned a certain number of rows, the SQL request really holds on to the milliseconds, how long it took to execute, and the scaler holds on to how many rows got returned. So if I were to go ahead and configure some of these, and I'll take this one for instance, user simulation. Normally I want to see if that passes or fails, right? And if it fails, I want it to send an email or do whatever I want. In this case, I went ahead and I selected custom failure criteria at the top. And if I hit my little ellipses over here, you could see that I now get my dialog to set up whatever custom failures I want. Now in this case, again, you see seconds here, right? It's not milliseconds, so keep that in mind. If it is above 9 seconds, then I want it to launch a severity 3 alert. But if it's above 15 seconds, then maybe the severity is a little higher. I want it to launch a severity 2 alert. And I actually went one step above and I created a little custom flow to look back and draw a graph. So in other words, just to kind of give you an idea of what you might be able to do with this, I'm just going to bring over my email window, and I'm going to show you guys that when that alert goes off, right, this is what it looks like, right? So it's a custom failure, and you'll see that it gives me my severity level. It'll give me the value that it was, and it'll give me my thresholds, so I could understand where in that threshold that it landed. And I put this other little automation in place. I'll show you this if you're interested. So what I told it was when that workspace login goes above my critical threshold, that I want it to launch this little performance report. And if I pull up this performance report, I added a couple graphs to it. The top one is the CPU for the last hour, and then the bottom one is the response time for my workspace logon. So you could see that that not only can I use this to get an alert, But I use this to auto-generate this report that gives me a little snapshot of the last hour of processor time and a little snapshot of the last hour of response times, so I can quickly see, you know, was that a one-off issue? Is there something more happening here that I need to be aware of? And I'll show you quickly how I did that in case you're interested. And again, flow on trigger, right? I could launch any flow I want to from there. And if I just close all this stuff out, I'm going to go to my automations. And I'm going to just show you really quickly workspace custom, right? So I just created this little flow, and I created this little performance report. And I told it, you know, show me the last hour. I wanted to show my CPUs. And then this here is a graph that I made from that particular health check, right? And I'll just close the loop on that because this is really the last thing I want to show you in Performance Lab right here. So I just created this little graph, and the way I did that was I went down to connectivity, and I picked the user simulation that I'm alerting on my custom failure, right? So I just picked that, and it graphs out the response time. So by doing all that, again, I've got kind of a nice closed loop of a process where I'm going to get an alert, and if it's over that time, I get a little report. And again, I can kind of quickly see if it was a one-off, if there's something going on, if there's a trend, and in that way, I can really use these custom failures to do way more than just send an alert. So again, on top of a pass-fail, you can get a lot more out of your health checks by using those custom failure criteria. So that's all I got for you today. Next session, next week, I don't know what I'm doing next week, so keep an eye on your email. We will have the subject coming soon. And of course, I always suggest if you got any feedback or questions, or if there's anything that you want to see us do, please let us know. You can email my email address is up there. You can email me directly or email the general support mailbox. Thank you so much for attending, guys. Have a great rest of your day.